and there are some extra lesson sheets on the back table. But we are finishing the lesson from last week entitled God's View of Debt. And if you need need a lesson sheet, you don't have yours from last week, raise your hand, and somebody will get you a lesson sheet. But Proverbs chapter number 13 this morning, and we are considering this topic of God's view of debt. We're going to get into, Lord willing, next week, some of the practical pointers on how to avoid debt, how to just stay out of it from the very get-go. But first, there's a need to establish what God thinks of it. And so we started into that last week, and we considered a couple of things. We began by looking at what the Bible says about debt, and we found that there is some laws or some rules. Really, if you look back in the Old Testament, there is opportunity given for both lending and borrowing money in the Old Testament law. And so it's not that it is sin to be in debt. I can't say that. I know some people would say that's a sin, but I can't say that it's a sin. I don't think scripturally you can make that case. But we have to understand that with borrowing and lending comes some rules and some principles that go along with it. And that is that they were not to borrow or charge exorbitant interest, and really to be generous. And then we looked at some of the principles there throughout the book of Psalms and Proverbs and Matthew about the need to not charge high interest, to definitely pay back what you owe. If you have borrowed and you've gotten yourself into a bind, I don't think it's right to walk away from that debt. I think we should pay back that which we owe. And then we can please God by being generous to others. Then we looked at Proverbs 22:7 that talks about the borrower is a servant to the lender, and there's an understandable principle there. And it's not forbidding borrowing, but it's definitely telling us we need to be careful and have a balanced view. It's not forbidden, it's not sinful, but it's dangerous and burdensome. And then we made some conclusions from that we would be wise to avoid debt and recognize that debt is our enemy, not our friend. And one of the reasons we want to stay out of debt is because we are to be slaves to righteousness rather than to the debt. And so that was really the first half of the lesson on the first page. And then we flipped over to the second side of our lesson sheet, and we began to look at different types of debt. Now, if you remember, we considered a couple of these and started into these last week, and there is some statistics here. And you may say, Pastor, we don't have much material to cover this morning. I have some extra notes that we'll get through as well that are not included in your notes, but want you to be aware of a couple things. We've broken them down. I've broken them down into three different sections, A, B, and C. A is communal debt. This is debts that we hold with other people. We looked at citizen debt. There was number one. As citizens of Illinois or of the United States, this is corporate debt that we're somewhat responsible for. I got home last Sunday, and the kids are like, Dad, do we really have to pay all that back? And I said, it's not personally on us, but it does matter who we elect, and there are views of should we go into further debt, should we pay off the debt that we have, but it is something that we carry because we're a citizen of this particular state and this nation. We looked at church debt as well. I'm thankful our church does not have any debt, and I think that's a great testimony for a church, and I praise the Lord for that. Then we moved on to letter B, personal debt, and these are debts that can be held individually. We saw credit card debt, and certainly many people are familiar with that, understanding of that. And then that brought us to number 2, student loan debt. And we wrapped up last week. I was making the case and helping us to understand that there is actually more money owed in student loan debt in America right now than in credit card debt. And this student loan debt thing has not been around for as long as credit card debt has been around. This is a more recent thing, but people are taking on tens of thousands of dollars in student loan debt, and there's a need for them to really repay it. There's all kinds of ideas, and I'm not getting political this morning about erasing and eliminating student loan debt, forgiving that. There's a whole different approach there, but I think if you've borrowed it, you ought to pay it back. And that's, I think that's a biblical principle we find all throughout the Bible dealing with this matter of debt. So it brings us to letter C under the student loan debt thing, misconceptions about student loan debt. We are taking a crop of young people in our country today. They come out of high school. Right away, we kick them into college and say, okay, you need to go there. Whether you can afford it or not, you just need to go. And there are a lot of kids going into college who will change their major between 5 and 7 times in the 4 years that they're in college. You know what that tells me? It tells me when they walked in the door, they had no clue what in the world they were there for. And all throughout the 4 years, they kept changing around. And eventually they reach a point and says, I've taken these classes. What degree can I get with this? That's kind of where they're at. And many times they're coming out of college with a degree that they'll never, ever use. And yet they have debt to pay back for this. And they make it very easy, very simple for these young kids to borrow large sums of money that they're going to be saddled with for a long time. So beware of student loan debt. Some misconceptions about student loan debt. First of all, under letter C. The first misconception is that a degree always improves your life. A degree always improves your life. My grandfather, on my mom's side, I believe it was, I'm trying to remember which grandfather said that. I think it was my mom's grandfather, or my mom's dad. But he always said this. He said, a title is like the tail on a pig. It's cute, but it serves absolutely no purpose. And the same way, many times, can go with a lot of these degrees. There are people that come out of college with a degree, and I have to ask them, what does that degree mean? I mean, it used to be, okay, you had a bachelor's of arts degree in business or an MBA of something like that, where you had an understanding of it was a very broad degree that could be used in a lot of different fields. But they come out with these degrees, and you're asking, what in the world is this all about? And so there's this misconception that if you have a degree, you will have a better life. It goes on there, training yourself on a student loan debt makes other life debt easier to take on. If you come out of high school, and I think any of us that have graduated from high school can look back on that time in our life and say, there were probably a lot of things that we thought we had figured out that we really didn't have figured out. Well, I mean, we graduated, we had a diploma in our hands, we were the smartest kids in the whole school, we were the 12th graders, we were the seniors, we were the graduating class. And yet we were just graduating kindergarten into real life, if I couldn't put it that way. We came out of high school thinking, I've got all this knowledge, I've got all this information that I've gathered in school, and here I go. And then we hit the real world and we realize, wait a second, life isn't the way I thought. And then there's the possibility to make some bad decisions early on in your life there and mess yourself up. And so kids will come out of school and right away they're getting trained on, hey, I can just borrow my way through life. If I borrow money to go to school, then I borrow money to get a car, then I borrow money to get a house, then I borrow money for this, and I borrow money for this, and I use credit cards. Pretty soon, they're coming out of college 4, 6, 8 years later with a couple $100,000 of debt. It's a dangerous misconception. Second misconception is that you need a degree in order to succeed. Now, I put it in my notes this way. In some fields, you do need good credentials. We talked about this briefly in another message. If you're going to be a doctor, I would love for you to go through med school and pass. I'm glad they have those benchmarks of things that you have to pass. But listen, there's a lot of jobs that you can do that without having a degree and be successful in them. I'm not against education. Don't take that from what I'm saying. But I'm saying find what God's plan is for your life and then ask, do I need a degree to do this task? I'm thankful that I went through and I have a degree in Bible college type things. I learned some things there. It was helpful to me. But frankly, my Bible college education looks a lot different than most pastors. There were a lot of guys my age, they came out of high school, they went straight to Bible college, and they were there for 4 years. I did a little bit of a different format. The church that we were going to, the pastor there offered for me to do a 6-year internship right there in the church. I was basically the assistant pastor that was unpaid. Great position. I was still working a full-time job, 40 hours, 50 hours a week, roughly at that full-time job, putting 20 hours a week in at the church. It was a busy lifestyle. On top of that, while I was doing that internship, I was also doing my Bible college correspondence work on top of all of those things. So it was a hectic time in our life. I was paying for that all out of my own pocket and finished that up and was able to end up with a degree. But you know, if I look back on that, I will say this: I learned more in 6 years of hands-on mentoring than I learned from the books. I'm thankful for the books. I still have the books. They're still on my shelf. But the books can't take you to the hospital and teach you how to make a hospital visit with somebody. The books can't teach you how to find and get a hold of God in prayer. And there were some things there where I had to have a practical, I'm thankful for the practical side of it. If I had to go back and choose between the book learning and the practical side, I would choose the practical side. As a missionary, I traveled around. One of the first questions people would ask me, what Bible college did you graduate from? Because they're trying to pigeonhole you into this little box of who you are. And I always explain the story. Well, it's a little bit different story. I'm thankful for that. But we have to realize it is possible to succeed, whether it's in ministry or whether it's in life, without a degree. I'm not against education, but we've elevated education to whereby it has become the most important thing. There's a danger in that. You need the misconception is that you need a degree to succeed. There are some fields where you need good credentials. In other fields, you just need good character. And I come back to this over and over and over and over again. The company that I worked for, the cabinet shop there that I worked for, when I started working for them, they had a board listing all of the cabinet makers. There were 6 of them, 7 when I came. And every week they would evaluate those cabinet workers and they would rank them. And basically, based on your rank, you got to choose which projects you wanted to do. And the guy at the bottom end of the totem pole got the projects that nobody else wanted to do. So it was incentive to move up the ladder. So there were 6 other cabinet makers. I came in. I was the 7th cabinet maker to start in there as I worked my way up into that position. And I got into that cabinet maker position. I got to the bottom. You always started at the bottom. I began to work hard and began to float my way up through the level there. And there was a guy who had been the number 1 cabinet maker in that company for a long time. A long time. And so as I'm working my way up through, getting to 4, 3, and when I got to number 2, he came over to me and he said, "You just need to understand something. Number 1 is my position." He said, "If you ever take that from me, I'll make life difficult for you." And I said, "Listen, I'm not here to take your position. I'm just here to do it hard. I'm just here to work my hardest and do my best. That's all I'm here to do." The process went on. And I stayed at number 2 there for a number of weeks. And I remember the plant manager calling me into the office one day. And he said to me, "You made it this week. We're going to move you up to number 1. It'll be the first time that guy's ever been upset in that sense." And I said, "Listen, he's already made some comments about the fact that he doesn't want me to be number 1. I said, "Do we have to keep this chart anymore?" And the plant manager looked at me and said, "You have a point." They eliminated the chart. Listen, I'm not here to say I'm number 1. My name was never on the board as number 1. I'm here to do my best. And I didn't get there because I had gone to carpentry school for 12 years. People ask all the time, "Pastor, how do you know how to build things?" I've spent time around people who build things. "Pastor, how do you know how to do electrical?" I've spent time with people who know how to do electrical. Listen, I haven't gone to school for all these things, but have a character, have a heart that's willing to learn these things. They'll take you a long way in life, young people. Most of the young people are over here. I'm not ignoring you guys today, but don't think you're going into new career fields over here. If you want to, it still applies. Have character. Listen, some of you young people, you have the character to show up at your place of work when you're told to show up and you do a good job. You won't have to worry about a raise. It'll come to you. You don't have to climb the corporate ladder. You'll float to the top. It's a market out there that is ridiculous. I'm getting off hand. Number 3, third misconception about student loan debt is that you have to go into debt to get a degree. I refuse to buy this. If God has called you to go to school, faithful is he who calleth you, who also will do it. Will it stretch your faith? Absolutely. Is that a bad thing? Not at all. I shared the testimony. I was working a full-time job. At that time, we were making, I think it was $8 or $9 an hour. Working in the shop, we were just talking about that the other day. There was no air conditioning in that shop in the summer times there in Cleveland. I had a thermometer sitting in my workbench. There were certain days that get up to 120 degrees working in that shop. Had a huge fan, about 2-foot diameter fan sitting right on my bench, blowing full blast just to kind of keep you alive until you got home. Making $8.50, $9 an hour. Working as hard as we could to provide for the needs of our little family, and then volunteering our time at church and paying for Bible college on top of it. It wasn't easy. But God provided. He was faithful. And it's a misconception that you have to go into debt to get a degree. Sped your degree out if you need to. Pay as you go. You'll work harder at it, and you'll appreciate it more. We live in a world today where we've made it so easy for people to have what they want without working for it. We want all the blessing and the benefit on the front end without having to put an ounce of effort in. I am so thankful that from a young age I was trained to say, hey, trained by my parents to say, hey, if there's something that you want, save for it and then buy it. That's a great principle. You know what it does? Number one, it makes you think through, do I really, really need this? Rather than regretting your purchase. The second thing it makes you do is work harder. There were certain things in life that I desired to have, things that I wanted to have, things that were important to me. And you work and you save towards that, and it helps to develop great character in your life. And so understand there's a need to save and work it that way. Number three, third type of personal loan debt. We looked at credit card debt. We looked at student loan debt. Number three, vehicle loan debt. Vehicle loan debt. Here's a recent statistic from last year. End of 2024, Americans now borrow an average of $41,572 for a new vehicle, and they are on average borrowing over $26,000 to buy a used vehicle. Hello? We're borrowing money to buy cars. Now, when you buy a car, I heard a guy say this one time, when you buy a car, you're getting into a contract between you and the junkyard. The car is trying desperately to get into the junkyard. You are trying desperately to keep it out of the junkyard. That's what happens when you buy a car. Now, you buy a brand new car, you drive it off the lot, immediately it depreciates by around 15% the moment that you drive it off the lot. Gone. I knew of a guy who purchased a vehicle, and he bought it used. It was a used vehicle. It had 84 miles on it when he bought it. Another individual had gone down, bought this vehicle brand new, drove it home, drove it the next day, didn't like it, brought it back to the dealership, and traded it in for a different vehicle. Now, the second owner of that car got a great deal because the first guy ate all the depreciation of that vehicle. It was no longer a new vehicle. It was a used vehicle. It was a new vehicle in functionality, but it was a used vehicle as it was listed. Don't be that person. Now listen, if God's blessed you, I'm not against people buying new cars. If God's blessed you and you have a nest egg and you're able to go out and buy a new car, go buy a new car. That's fine. But I'm saying, when we're borrowing $50,000, $41,000, I should say, to buy a new car, that's $40,000 that we didn't have in order to buy a car that we probably don't really need. A car that's a used car sometimes can work the same as a car that's a new car. And I understand there's maintenance costs. I understand all of those things. But I understand we have to think through these things. If we're going to take this debt upon ourselves, the borrower is going to be servant to the lender. The very first car that I ever bought, it was in 2006. No. When did we get married? We got married in 2004. Must have been 2002 I bought that car. 2002 I bought that car. It was a 2000. It was 2 years old. It had 58,000 miles on it. My grandfather had sold that car originally. He was a car salesman there. He had sold it brand new. They brought it back on auction, and it was a car that I was looking for. He called me up. He said, I found a car. And told me all about it and told me the price of it. And it was a used car, 2 years old, 58,000 miles on it. And I looked in my bank account, and I had saved up enough money to buy a 2-year-old car. Bought that car. It was a 5-speed Kia Optima. Never forget, 4-door sedan. Love that car. Put 100,000 miles on that car. I still had the original clutch when I sold it. Emily learned to drive stick on that car. A lot of good memories with that particular vehicle. But we drove that car and drove that car and drove that car and drove that car. But we never had a payment on that car. Be wise in that. The vehicles I own, I've never had a car payment. I'm not bragging this morning. I'm saying, listen, there's possibility of you being able to save up, purchase something that you can use, and then go from there, okay? So vehicle loan debt. Letter B, if you had a car payment of $415, which, as I've done the math here, that's pretty middle of the road. There's a lot of car payments higher than that. There's some that are lower than that. But $415, if you took a car payment of $415 a month and you invested that for 30 years at 8% interest, you'll have $570,000 at the end of those 30 years, instead of a car that still needs to be repaired, still needs to be traded in. It's a matter of where our priorities are at, all right? Number four, mortgage debt. Mortgage debt. I told you to turn to Proverbs 13. We'll get there in just a second, but let's go over to James chapter 4. I want to cover this first. I was going to change the order around a little bit this morning, but we'll stick with the original plan here. James chapter number 4. And this idea of mortgage debt is one that, frankly, if you talk to a number of different pastors, preachers, Christian workers, you'll find all kinds of different opinions about this matter of mortgage debt, okay? And so I want to give some allowance for the balance of this portion here, but I'll put it this way. Letter A, some people view property debt as an investment because of appreciation. They have the concept that if typically a piece of property will appreciate in value. But I would caution you with that thinking, because that's not always the case, and it's not a guarantee. Whereas, as compared to property debt versus a car payment debt, I know that when I take my new car off the lot, it's going to depreciate. I know that as time goes on, the value of that vehicle will go down. There's no question about it. There's no doubt about it. It's absolutely the value of that car is going to continue to diminish over time as the condition of that car diminishes. The thought process with mortgage loan debt is some people say, well, with property values constantly are going up. There is a point to that. What they often overlook is the fact that there's also inflation in every other area of the market that's going up too. So yes, your property value may go up, but also so are your expenses. You have to balance those things out. And regardless of what view you take in regards to this mortgage situation, property values going up is not a guarantee. James chapter number 4 and verse number 14 and 15 says this. Whereas, well, let's go back up to verse number 13. Go to now, ye that say, today or tomorrow we will go into such and such a city and continue there a year and buy and sell, and here's the key, and get gain. There's the assumption, there's the plan that we're going to make money off of this endeavor. And he's warning them. James is warning them here in verse number 14. Whereas ye know not what shall be on the morrow, for what is your life? It is even a vapor that appeareth for a little time, and then vanisheth away. For that ye ought to say, if the Lord will, we shall live and do this or that. What James is saying here, he's saying, beware or be cautious against saying, this is the plan. We're going to do this for 1 year. At the end of this year, we're going to have this much in return from that. It's a guaranteed investment. There is no such thing as a guaranteed investment. God is in control. And those of you that may not believe that, I would challenge you to go back into history and look at 2008, what happened to the housing market. We were encouraged. We got married in 2004. We were encouraged to rent a place rather than buy a place because we were going to go to the mission field. Some of the best advice I ever got. I wanted to buy a house. We had the money to buy a house. We took the counsel that was given to us and did not buy a house. We rented a place. The counsel given to us was rent a place instead of buying a place, because when you go to the mission field, if you get in a position where you can't sell your house, now you're in a bind. We listened to the counsel that we were given. We didn't buy a house. We rented. It killed me to rent. Every place we lived, it killed me to rent. We rented an apartment. We moved from that apartment into a duplex. And a widowed lady, a younger widowed lady. Her husband had died suddenly, unexpected, a heart attack. And it was up and down duplex she had inherited from her aunt. She wanted to live upstairs. We had a ranch living basically first floor. We lived there, and the house had not been maintained the greatest. It's been about 5 years since it had been maintained, and so we moved in, and we didn't have a ton of money. And I said to the landlord, I said, is there any chance that I could help fix up the house, and we can work out an agreement, taking off some of the rent, and we worked that agreement out, fix that house up. Emily will tell you, there were a lot of times that I would come to her frustrated. How is it that I'm fixing up these houses? This lady's getting all the benefits. She's getting the equity out of it, and I'm paying rent. What do I have to show for this? I wanted to own a house. We moved to the Arctic. we got to the Arctic, and up there, rent was ridiculously expensive. $2,500 to $3,000 a month in the Arctic. That's expensive rent. We rented this little dinky duplex. It was small. It needed some repairs. I talked to the property manager, and I said, hey, if I do some of the repairs, we take some of the money off the rent. And he said, sure. And so we worked out an agreement there. After that, we house sat for our co-workers for a time. They came back. We moved into a different apartment. We were on the 3rd floor. There was no elevator. I don't know why you don't put an elevator in an apartment building. Everything we owned, we carried up the stairwell. I had the flu that day that we moved. That's a memorable move. We lived there for a couple of months. God opened up a door for us to buy a house in the Arctic. Houses were expensive as well. I remember calling the bank because we were going to need to take out a loan to buy that house. He said, what's your current rental payment? I told him what our current rent was. And he was looking at the numbers, and he said, well, this is a no-brainer. Your mortgage is going to be $1,000 a month less than your rent. I said, sign me up. Pay it off faster. Let's do this. Shorten the term up. And we own that house. And you know, the Lord's allowed, we've never lived in a fancy house. Still don't. But the Lord's allowed us to take places and invest some sweat equity in them. But we've never purchased a place saying, this is where we're going to stay forever. That's the Lord's to do. Now, I've tried to be wise. I've tried to buy places that we can invest sweat equity into and fix up and have that advantage. But here's the thing. You have to understand, God's in control. Don't take these things on and forget the fact that it's not a guaranteed investment. Let it be. However, you can avoid a lot of debt by investing some sweat equity into your property. I challenge you, learn a skill. Even if you can't do everything, you can do something and pour that in. Invest into your property that way. And so that's the mortgage debt. There's a lot of mortgage debt that is held. And I want to give you just a couple of thoughts here before we get to letter C about purchasing a home. And I want to give you some things that people have shared with me over the years that have been very beneficial. These are not in your notes, so jot them down somewhere else on the top or on the side, on the back of your bulletin, but I want to give you a couple thoughts. If you're looking to purchase a home, let me give you three principles that can maybe help you along the way. First of all, I would challenge you to consider renting first. Somebody gave us that advice years ago. It was some of the best advice that we ever got. We did rent for a time. Now, my goal was not to rent forever. I was not a good renter in the sense that I didn't like renting. I wanted to own my own home. I was a good renter in the sense that I paid my rent every month on time, and I would try to be a good tenant. But consider renting. We got married. In our situation, we got married. We're jumping into life as a married couple and think everything is new. There were times where it was nice to be able to pick up the phone and call the property manager and say, hey, the toilet's not working, and I don't have to pay for it. Hey, this isn't working or that isn't working. It's on someone else's responsibility. It's included in my rent. I understand that, but consider renting for a time. Number two, the second principle, if you're looking to buy a home, is learn to live modestly. Learn to live modestly. When we were renting, we didn't make a lot of money. But we took the money that we were making and we set up a budget. We said, okay, this is what we need for our living expenses. And we found a way to live on less than we made. I remember one particular time, there were some unexpected medical bills that had come up, and we needed to have some extra income to pay for these things. And the shop where I was working, we were building a project, and we were putting all these things together, and they had all come with a little hardware bag, and in those hardware bags was 3-inch long stainless steel screws. And we didn't need those long screws because we were putting the item, we weren't assembling it where it actually went, we were putting it on a display, so we only needed shorter, like 1.5-inch screws. So they began to throw away all of these 3-inch stainless steel screws. And so I was working on the project that day, and I asked the project manager, I said, can I take these screws home? He said, sure, I don't care, we're just throwing them away. So I set some buckets out, and they put all these screws in these buckets and boxes, and hauled these things home. And do you remember sitting in our living room floor, ripping open hardware bags, pulling out screws, and we put them in there. We took them to the scrapyard, and we used that money to help pay off a medical bill. Now, there's nothing more boring than sitting on your living room floor, pulling screws out of bags. But we learned to live on less than we made. We were living modestly. We were trying to live frugally so that we could save up for the next step. And so learn to consider renting, learn to live modestly. Number 3, consider buying a starter home. Consider buying a starter home. Pastor, what is a starter home? A starter home is a house that you're not planning to live there forever, and it's motivation for you to keep saving. You move in there, quarters are cramped, they're a little bit tight, it's not comfortable. When we went to the Arctic, the only thing that we could afford was this little tiny house. The housing market up there was ridiculous. We lived it was just at 1,000 square foot house. Lowell, your house is what, 900? Right at 900. If you've been to Lowell's, or your house is probably about the same size there, Miss Stacy. I don't know how big my house is. Lowell's house, Stacy's house, there were 9 of us living in there. 3 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, 1 kitchen, and 1 little living room. 1,000 square feet. This room, it's about, our whole house would have fit within this auditorium easily. Our whole house would have fit within this auditorium easily. Probably 2/3 of this auditorium now that I'm looking at it. Our whole house was about 2/3 of this auditorium, 9 of us. 1 bathroom. Yes, there was a time limit. Get out! I'm next. 300 gallons of water a day is what we had. We had a tank. They bring the water, they put it in there. That's what we had. That was not my forever home. That was not what came to mind. We bought this house. It was what we could afford. We began to work on it, fix it up. We had plans to put a 1,700 square foot addition on our 1,000 square foot house. That was my forever home idea. But God had a different plan. Listen, it's okay to buy a starter house. We bought that little house. We crammed everything we had into it. And we learned to say, hey, we don't have room for some things, and we got rid of them. We began to live there and say, okay, this is what's important. It's easy to maintain a little place like that. But we saved, and we worked to be able to have what we needed. Learn to buy a starter house, and then as the Lord blesses and as you've grown, then you can grow from there. So consider renting, live modestly, buy a starter home. If you are considering purchasing a home, let me give you 2 other thoughts of advice to consider, especially if you're looking to take on mortgage debt. The first one is please, please, please understand the term qualifying. When you go to a mortgage lender and they say, hey, you qualify for, when we began to look for property, there was a particular property we were going to look at, and they had to have a pre-approval letter just to get on the property to look at it. So I called the bank, explained the situation. They sent a pre-approval letter. When they sent me the pre-approval letter, I laughed my head off. You're pre-approved for X amount of thousands of dollars. And I looked at Emily and I said, this is how people get in trouble. They get a letter that says, hey, you can buy a $300,000, $400,000, $500,000, $700,000 house. Yeah, in a perfect world with no hiccups that come into play. That money that they have pre-approved you for, that money that you qualify for, is an insanely high number. I would challenge you, don't take that as this is the house we need to buy. Pull it back about, I don't know, 20% or more. Because inevitably, if we would have bought a house that we were qualified for, we'd be in over our heads. And that's what happens. People get it. So understand that qualifying is not necessarily the range I should be looking for, but for sure don't go over that. But you should be looking way below that. The second thing that I would challenge you to do if you're looking to buy a home is choose a 15-year mortgage instead of a 30-year mortgage. I would challenge you, go down to the bank there if you're looking to borrow money and say, okay, if I were to borrow it and I could set aside this much in my budget per month, what would that do on a 15-year mortgage? Because the amount of interest that you are going to pay on a 30-year mortgage is probably at least 1.5 times what you originally paid for the property. That's a ridiculous amount of interest. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars. And you can save a lot by going to a 15-year mortgage, okay? And so I'm not going to make a dogmatic position one way or another. I've had some pastors that I've known that have said, you shouldn't buy a property until you can pay cash for it. I don't know that I can go to that extreme. I've had other pastors that I've known that said, just live on borrowed money. I don't know that I'm going to that extreme. I think there's a balance in the middle. Find God's will and walk in it, all right? Letter C, and lastly this morning then, third type of debt is generational debt. We're back to Proverbs chapter number 13 then. Generational debt, and this is debts that are handed off to future generations. When it comes to this matter of debt, you have to understand there's always a matter of sacrifice involved somewhere in financial equations. When we come to, and I'll give you the blanks there in just a moment. When we come to the matter of the Christian living, oftentimes we will share with people, yes, there's a need to make a sacrifice up front. If a situation presents itself to me, when sin comes and there's that presentation of sin, the temptation, the devil presents the pleasure of sin for a season. He says, look, this is where it seems like it would be fine. This is where sin looks like it would be good. This is where sin looks like it would be easy. And he never shows you the cost of that's paid on the back end. Walking with Jesus, yes, it may cost me something up front to take a stand for him, but then the blessing comes afterwards. In this matter of generational debt, letter C, I'll give you a blank and then I want to talk about it here a little bit. You can sacrifice now by staying out of debt. Or you can sacrifice your children's future by leaving your debt to them rather than a material and a spiritual inheritance. In Proverbs chapter 13 and verse number 22, the Bible says this, a good man leaveth an inheritance to his children's children, and the wealth of the sinner is laid up for, read those last two words, the just. Let me say it a different way. There are some things that Emily and I could spend our money on right now that we would enjoy, but it would come at the expense of our children. And we live in a world today where relationships, so many relationships, are built on what can I get out of this rather than what can I give. It happens in marriage. Husband and wife will come together and they have struggle, they have strife in their marriage because each one of them is looking to say, what do I get out of this? That's not at all how you should approach your marriage. Marriage is about what can I give? He that will be greatest amongst you, everybody's looking to be the top banana. He that will be greatest amongst you, let him be your servant, your minister. The closeness that comes in a relationship is when I think, okay, what does my wife need and how can I provide that for her? It may mean that she needs me to sit there and listen to how her days went. She may need a break. She might need 100 other different things. But if I come to the marriage saying, you're just not providing for my needs, I'm going to have a grouchy marriage. If I come to the marriage saying, how can I meet your needs? And I'm looking to serve her, and she's looking to serve me, we'll have a blessed marriage. If you can get in a competition in your marriage of who can outserve the other one, you're on your way to a happy marriage. And it'll be fun along the way. But if you go into the marriage saying, what can I get out of it? Take, you'll never be satisfied. Same way with parents and children. Sometimes the parents say, well, I'm the parent, I deserve this, never even thinking about the cost that's associated with the next generation. We grew up in Cleveland, Ohio, and south of Cleveland there's an Amish community, second largest Amish community in all the world, Holmes County, Ohio. There are tons of Amish there, and the Amish don't really use the same banking systems that we do. They would not borrow money the same ways that we do, and very few of them, certain highly advanced Amish communities, if I can put it that way, would begin to use some of the same banking that we use, but by and large, it is just word of mouth, and it's done all within their community. Some of the Amish now are buying farms on promises that they will pay them back, not in their generation, not in their children's generation, but in their grandchildren's generation. What that means is grandpa is buying a farm as a guy my age, saying that this will finally be paid back when my grandchildren pay it back. That's not what Proverbs 13:22 says. Proverbs 13:22 says the descriptor of a good man is one who leaves an inheritance to his children's children. I've heard pastors say, well, this is just a spiritual inheritance. I'm all for leaving a spiritual inheritance. If you leave a physical inheritance without a spiritual inheritance, you've missed the boat. But it's definitely talking about finances, because it goes on in verse number 22, talking about wealth. There is an opportunity, there is a responsibility, not only for me to provide for the needs of my family, but I believe there's a requirement upon a good man, a godly man, to provide an inheritance that extends to his grandchildren. Does that mean I have to give all my money to my grandchildren? My kids say, no, give it to us, Dad. But here's where I think it ties in. Some of it should be able, if I've taught my children financial principles, godly financial principles, and the wealth that God has given to me, the things that He's given us to steward, the things that we've held on, when Emily and I go to be the Lord, and we hand them off to our children, we've handed off our wealth, and we've handed off the teaching of how to handle it, to whereby they are able to take some of those same things, and when they go to be with the Lord, it continues on the next generation. That's my desire. I was teaching a breakout session at one of the couples retreats a couple years ago, and I challenged the couples there. It was a session on child rearing, and I challenged the couples there. I said, raise your children with your grandchildren in view. I am raising my children right now. There's some things that I'm doing in raising our children because of some ways that I want my grandchildren to turn out. If we have such a short focus view of what's in this for me, we won't even think about our kids. If we have such a short focus view of what's in it for my kids, we'll miss what's in the next generation. And listen, Satan's there to come in and take things and go off the rails with them very quickly. There is sacrifice involved. There has been sacrifice involved in staying out of debt. But my friend, the sacrifices now will come with benefits later. I could take all of those things now. I could enjoy them all now and sacrifice my children's future by leaving debt to them rather than a material and a spiritual inheritance. We have things turned around in our country today in this matter of finances. We think nothing of leaving debt from one generation to the next. But my friends, I don't think that's the way that God would have it to be. We've considered God's view of debt. And Lord willing, next week we'll begin to consider how to avoid and how to stay out of debt. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you for the truth of your word. Lord, I thank you for these principles that are given in your word and the warnings, the cautions against getting into debt. Certainly it's not sinful, it's not forbidden, but Lord, it comes with great dangers associated with it. I pray that you'd help us to develop the character that we need to walk with you, to be a right example, Lord, to even be willing to sacrifice the wants, the desires that we have, Lord, that we might be able to provide for our own, provide for the needs that we have, provide for our children, our grandchildren, and future generations to come. Lord, teach us these principles, give us the strength and the faith to believe you and to put these into practice, we pray, and we ask these things in your name. Amen. All right, we're going to be dismissed from our Sunday school hour, and we'll start our morning service here in about 15 minutes. Lord bless you.